Montana Territory, 1875. The wind scattered dust across the main street of Elkhorn, a frontier town nestled between rolling plains and distant mountains. 19-year-old Faith Prescott pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the general store, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered around the corner. Her golden blonde hair, usually neatly braided, had come partially undone, and her simple blue calico dress was smudged with dirt from her desperate flight through town. Faith! The slurred bellow of her stepfather echoed down the street, causing horses to skitter nervously and townspeople to look up with concern. "You get back here, girl." Faith closed her eyes, willing herself invisible. Coming to town had been a mistake, but they needed supplies, and her mother was too ill to make the journey. Now she was trapped, with Silas between her and the wagon path home. She had long believed that the frontier was a place where the weak perished and the strong survived alone. Since her father's death 3 years ago and her mother's subsequent marriage to Silas Wentworth, Faith had learned that depending on others only brought pain. The Montana Territory had no mercy for young women with dreams beyond survival. "There you are." Silas appeared suddenly, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with fingers that would leave bruises. "Thought you could hide from me? Your mother's waiting for those supplies, and you're in town making eyes at every cowpoke that passes." "I wasn't," Faith began, but the sharp sting of Silas's palm across her cheek silenced her protest. "Don't you lie to me, girl," he growled, whiskey fumes washing over her. "I saw you talking to that merchant. Think I don't know what you're about." Faith struggled against his grip, knowing that fighting would only enrage him further, but unable to submit. No one in town would interfere. Frontier justice rarely extended to family matters, and Silas, for all his faults, was her legal guardian now. "Please, Silas," she whispered, hating the quaver in her voice. "Let me go? I'll bring the supplies home." "You'll come with me now," he said, dragging her toward the saloon. "Might as well have a drink while we're in town." Faith's blood ran cold. The last time Silas had taken her to the saloon, he'd tried to trade her company to settle his gambling debts. She'd barely escaped with her virtue intact. "No." She twisted violently, breaking his grip, and turned to run. She collided hard with someone, the impact nearly knocking her off her feet. Strong hands steadied her, and Faith looked up into eyes the color of the summer sky. The young man holding her wore the dust of the trail, but his clothes were finer than most cowboys passing through. A crisp white shirt beneath a leather vest, dark trousers, and boots that had seen use, but were clearly well made. "Whoa there," he said, his voice deep yet gentle. "Are you all right, miss?" Before Faith could answer, Silas stormed forward. "This ain't your business, mister. That's my stepdaughter, and she's coming with me." The stranger didn't release Faith's shoulders. Instead, he studied her face, noting the red mark blooming on her cheek and the fear in her hazel eyes. "Is that what you want, miss?" he asked quietly. No one had asked what she wanted in so long that Faith found herself momentarily speechless. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shook her head. "I believe the lady would prefer to remain here," the stranger said, stepping slightly in front of Faith. Silas puffed up like an angry toad. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Zachary Irvington," the man replied evenly. "I purchased the Rocking M last month. And you would be?" Faith watched the transformation on her stepfather's face with astonishment. The Rocking M was the largest ranch in the county, and its former owner, Jonathan Miller, had been the wealthiest man in the territory before his death. "Silas Wentworth," her stepfather muttered, suddenly less aggressive. "Look, Irvington, I don't want trouble. The girl's been difficult since her father passed. Just needs a firm hand is all. I'd say she's had enough firmness for one day." Zachary's voice remained pleasant, but Faith sensed the steel beneath it. "Miss Wentworth." "Prescott," Faith corrected softly. "Faith Prescott." "Miss Prescott," he continued with a slight nod, "was about to have coffee with me at the hotel. We have business to discuss." Silas narrowed his bloodshot eyes. "What business would you have with my stepdaughter?" "I'm looking to hire help at the ranch," Zachary replied smoothly. "I heard in town that Miss Prescott is quite skilled with horses. But that's between her and me, Mr. Wentworth." Faith stared at the young rancher in confusion. She had a way with horses, true, but she'd never mentioned it to anyone in town. Silas hesitated, clearly torn between asserting his authority and offending the territory's newest power. Self-interest won out. Fine, he growled. But she's to come straight home after. Her mother needs her. Zachary nodded politely, though his eyes had hardened. Of course. Good day, Mr. Wentworth. Silas gave Faith a look that promised future retribution before staggering back toward the saloon. Thank you, Faith whispered when he was out of earshot. But I don't understand. I never applied for work at your ranch. Zachary Irvington's mouth curved into a genuine smile that transformed his handsome face. He was younger than Faith had initially thought, perhaps 25, with sandy brown hair and that light stubble that spoke of days on the trail. You didn't, he admitted. But you looked like you needed rescuing, and that seemed the most expedient excuse. Though if you do need employment, the offer stands. I really am short-handed. Faith bit her lip. That's kind, but I can't leave my mother. She's ill, and Silas. She trailed off, unwilling to speak the brutal truth to a stranger, that Silas would take any abandonment out on her mother. Zachary studied her thoughtfully. Well, at least let me buy you that coffee I mentioned. Give your stepfather time to cool his heels at the saloon. Against her better judgment, Faith found herself nodding. 1 hour of peace before facing Silas again seemed worth whatever risk came with accepting the kindness of a stranger, even a handsome, wealthy one with eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Elkhorn, a place Faith had never entered. As they were seated at a table by the window, she was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the curious glances from other patrons. Don't mind them, Zachary said, noting her discomfort. Most are just surprised to see me with company. I've been something of a recluse since arriving. Faith found that hard to believe. With his easy confidence and striking good looks, she imagined women throughout the territory were already setting their caps for the new owner of the Rocking M. Why did you help me? She asked bluntly after they'd ordered coffee. Most men would have walked on by. Zachary's expression darkened. I'm not most men, and I recognized the look of someone trapped in an impossible situation. He paused as the waitress delivered their coffee. Besides, my mother always taught me that true strength is shown in how you treat those who cannot repay you. Your mother sounds wise, Faith said softly. She was. The past tense hung between them, an unspoken understanding passing between two people acquainted with loss. Faith sipped her coffee, savoring the rich flavor she rarely got to enjoy. I should be getting back soon. I still need to collect our supplies, and if Silas drinks too much. She didn't need to finish the thought. Let me help, Zachary offered. My wagon's outside, and I can drive you home. That would only make things worse, Faith said with a sad smile. But thank you. This, she gestured to the coffee, the moment of respite, was kindness enough. As they parted outside the hotel, Zachary handed her a small card. If you ever need help, or that job, this is where to find me. Faith tucked the card into her pocket, certain she would never use it, but treasuring the gesture nonetheless. In a world where she'd learned to expect the worst from people, Zachary Irvington was an anomaly she couldn't quite comprehend. She had no way of knowing that their paths would cross again much sooner than either expected. 3 weeks later, Faith stumbled through the pre-dawn darkness, one eye swollen shut and her ribs aching with each labored breath. Behind her, the small cabin she shared with her mother and Silas was illuminated by oil lamps, her stepfather's drunken shouts echoing through the night as he tore the place apart looking for her. He'd returned from town in a foul mood, having lost heavily at cards. When Faith had tried to help her mother to bed, Silas had accused her of hiding money from him. His rage had exploded with a violence that exceeded even his usual cruelty. This time, Faith knew she couldn't stay. Her mother had begged her to run while Silas was distracted searching the root cellar, pressing a small locket containing her father's portrait into Faith's palm. Live, my darling, she had whispered. I'll manage Silas. Just live. Now Faith moved through the darkness, following the faint trail toward Elkhorn, her few possessions wrapped in a shawl. She had no clear plan beyond getting away, finding work somewhere Silas wouldn't think to look for her. Perhaps she could make it to Helena, or even further west. The distant thunder of hooves made her heart seize with terror. Had Silas discovered her missing so quickly? She ducked into a stand of cottonwoods, pressing herself against the rough bark as the rider approached. The horse and rider passed her hiding place, then slowed and circled back. Faith held her breath, praying for invisibility. Hello, a familiar voice called. Is someone there? Faith remained frozen, uncertain. I saw a movement by the trees. The voice continued. I'm not looking for trouble, just making sure no one needs help. Recognition washed over her. Zachary Irvington. What was he doing on this trail before dawn? Slowly, Faith stepped from the shadows. Mr. Irvington? Zachary dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. In the faint pre-dawn light, his expression changed from curiosity to concern as he took in her battered face. Good God, he breathed. Miss Prescott, what happened? Faith turned away, shame burning through her despite knowing she'd done nothing to deserve Silas's fists. I need to keep moving. He might come after me. Without hesitation, Zachary removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. My ranch is closer than town. Let me take you there. I can't impose. You're not imposing, he said firmly. And you need medical attention. He paused, then added more gently. You'll be safe there, Faith. I promise. The use of her given name, spoken with such compassion, broke something inside her. Tears she'd forbidden herself to shed spilled down her cheeks as Zachary carefully helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. I have men patrolling my boundaries, he said as they rode. No one crosses Rockingham land without my knowing. Your stepfather won't reach you there. Faith wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her that safety was an illusion. Still, as they rode through the lightning landscape, the warm strength of the man behind her and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them lulled her into a tentative hope. The Rockingham ranch house appeared on the horizon as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Faith had heard it was impressive, but the reality surpassed the rumors. The two-story structure of hewn logs and river stones stood proudly against the backdrop of mountains, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. Several outbuildings and corrals completed the picture of frontier prosperity. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a cap, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm as she saw Faith. Mrs. Landry, Zachary called as he dismounted. Please prepare the guest room and send for Dr. Wells. Right away, Mr. Irvington, the woman replied, hurrying back inside. Zachary turned to help Faith down, his hands gentle on her waist. The movement sent pain shooting through her ribs, and she couldn't suppress a whimper. I'm sorry, he murmured, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. Let's get you inside. Faith had never seen such luxury as the interior of the Rockingham ranch house. Polished wooden floors gleamed beneath woven rugs, and the furniture, though rustic, was finely crafted. Mrs. Landry, evidently the housekeeper, led them to a bedroom on the ground floor. The doctor's been sent for, she informed Zachary. I've put out clean linens and some of my daughter's old things that might fit the young lady. Thank you, Mrs. Landry. Zachary turned to Faith. This room is yours for as long as you need it. No one will enter without your permission, not even me. Faith looked around the comfortable space with its brass bed and cheerful quilts, struggling to comprehend such kindness from a virtual stranger. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zachary's eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. Because everyone deserves safety, he said simply. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're feeling better. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery. Dr. Wells confirmed that Faith had 2 cracked ribs and numerous contusions, but would heal with rest. Mrs. Landry proved to be a kind, motherly presence, bringing nourishing meals and sitting with Faith to ensure she wasn't alone with her thoughts too often. Zachary visited daily, always knocking and waiting for permission to enter. He brought books from his library, flowers from the garden, and conversation that never probed at her wounds but instead offered glimpses into his world. Faith learned that he had come west from Boston following his parents' deaths, seeking purpose in the vast frontier. The Rockingham had been purchased with his inheritance, and he was determined to build something lasting. The land demands honesty, he told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch, Faith wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. It strips away pretense. I found that liberating after Boston society. Is that why you ride out alone before dawn? Faith asked, remembering their encounter on the trail. A smile touched his lips. You caught me. I like to see the land wake up. There's something sacred about that moment when night surrenders to day. Faith felt a strange kinship with this educated Easterner who spoke of the land with a poet's heart, yet worked alongside his ranch hands with calloused hands and quiet competence. As her strength returned, Faith began to venture beyond the house. She discovered the small herd of horses Zachary was breeding, magnificent animals with bloodlines tracing back to Spanish stock. Almost without thinking, she found herself in the corral one morning, speaking softly to a skittish filly that had resisted all attempts at gentling. "You understand her." Zachary's voice came from behind her as the filly nuzzled Faith's palm. "She's been difficult since we brought her in." Faith stroked the horse's sleek neck. "She's not difficult. She's afraid. There's a difference." Something in Zachary's expression shifted as he looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is." That afternoon, he offered her the position of horse trainer for the Rockingham. "It would come with fair wages," he explained. "Your own cabin if you prefer privacy, though you're welcome to stay in the main house as long as you wish." Faith hesitated, though the offer was more generous than anything she could have hoped for. "Silas will come looking for me eventually," she said. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Let me worry about Silas Wentworth," Zachary replied, a hardness entering his voice that Faith hadn't heard before. "Your skills are valuable to the ranch. This isn't charity, Faith. It's good business." They both knew it was more than that, but Faith appreciated the dignity his framing offered her. "Then I accept, Mr. Irvington." "Zachary," he corrected with a smile. "If we're to be colleagues, I think we can dispense with formalities." Faith found herself returning his smile, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Zachary," she agreed, testing the name on her tongue. As autumn deepened toward winter, Faith settled into life at the Rockingham. The skittish filly, whom she named Esperanza, Spanish for hope, became her special project, responding to Faith's patient handling with increasing trust. The parallel wasn't lost on Faith, who found her own walls lowering as the weeks passed. She worried about her mother, sending letters through Dr. Wells when he traveled to more distant homesteads. The replies were infrequent but assured Faith that Martha Prescott was managing. Silas, it seemed, had been subdued by a visit from the territorial marshal, who had received anonymous information about illegal whiskey trading. The marshal had mentioned that Faith was safely employed at a respectable ranch and that her welfare was being monitored by prominent citizens. Faith suspected Zachary's hand in this intervention, but chose not to ask directly. Their relationship had evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding that neither wished to disturb with complications. That changed on a bitter December night when a blizzard howled across the Montana plains. Faith had stayed late in the stables, checking on a mare about to foal. The storm had descended with unexpected ferocity, and by the time she finished, the path to the main house had disappeared beneath swirling snow. She was considering whether to wait out the storm in the stable when the door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and Zachary, a lantern held high. "Faith!" Relief flooded his face as he spotted her. "Thank God. When you didn't come in for supper, I feared you might have gone to your cabin." Faith had indeed moved into one of the small cabins reserved for senior ranch staff, valuing her independence despite Zachary's standing invitation to remain in the main house. "The mare was restless," she explained, brushing straw from her skirt. "I lost track of time." Zachary crossed to her, setting the lantern on a nearby shelf. In its golden light, his face was shadowed with concern. "We'll have to stay here until the storm passes. It's too dangerous to try reaching the house now." Faith nodded, trying to ignore the sudden awareness of their isolation. They had never been truly alone before, always in the presence of ranch hands or Mrs. Landry. "There are blankets in the tack room," she said, keeping her voice practical. "And it's warm enough with the animals." They settled in the hay loft, backs against a wall of stacked hay bales, blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded thing, but inside the stable, the atmosphere was almost peaceful, lantern light casting dancing shadows, the comfortable sounds of horses below. "I've been meaning to thank you," Faith said after a while. "For what?" "For whatever you did to keep Silas away. The marshal's visit. My mother's letters mention that he seems afraid to cause trouble now." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "You deserve protection," he finally said. "And your mother too." "Most men wouldn't have bothered," Faith observed. "A runaway stepdaughter with a violent guardian isn't exactly a desirable complication." "I'm not most men," Zachary replied, echoing his words from their first meeting. Faith turned to look at him, really look at him, in a way she'd been avoiding for weeks. The lantern light caught the angles of his face, the warmth in his eyes as they met hers. "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." Something shifted between them, a current of feeling neither had acknowledged. "Faith," Zachary began, his voice husky. "I want you to know that He was interrupted by a distressed whinny from below. Faith was on her feet instantly, recognizing the mayor's call. "She's foaling," she said, already moving toward the ladder. The next hours were consumed with bringing new life into the world, a perfect colt with a white star on his forehead. By the time they'd ensured both mother and foal were settled, the storm had begun to subside, and whatever Zachary had been about to confess remained unspoken. Faith told herself it was for the best. Her experiences had taught her that depending on others, especially men, led only to pain. Zachary might be different, but the risk of discovering otherwise was too great. Better to preserve their friendship and her position at the ranch than to gamble on emotions that might prove fleeting. January brought a hard freeze and unexpected visitors. Faith was working with Esperanza in the covered training ring when she heard raised voices from the direction of the main house. Securing the filly, she made her way toward the commotion, stopping short at the sight that greeted her. Silas Wentworth stood on the porch, flanked by two men Faith didn't recognize. Facing them, Zachary stood with the ranch foreman and two cowboys, his stance relaxed but alert. "She's my legal responsibility," Silas was saying as Faith approached. "Her mother's taken a turn for the worse, and she's needed at home." Faith's heart clenched at the mention of her mother, but she knew better than to trust anything Silas said. "Miss Prescott is employed here under contract," Zachary replied evenly. "If she chooses to leave, that's her decision. But you have no authority to remove her." Silas's face darkened. "She's 19 years old. The law says she's of age to make her own decisions," Zachary interrupted. "And the law also takes a dim view of men who beat women under their care." One of Silas's companions shifted uncomfortably, but Silas himself only grew more belligerent. "You calling me a wife-beater, Irvington? That's slander." "I don't believe I mentioned your wife," Zachary said coolly. "But if the accusation fits." Faith stepped forward then, unwilling to hide while others fought her battles. "What do you want, Silas? You've never cared about my welfare before." Silas's bloodshot eyes fixed on her, calculation replacing anger. "Your mother's dying, girl. Pneumonia. Doc says she won't last the week." The words hit Faith like a physical blow. Could it be true? Or was this another of Silas's manipulations? "If my mother is ill, I should see her," Faith said slowly. "But I won't be returning to your house permanently." "Faith," Zachary began, concern evident in his voice. "Let me send for Dr. Wells first. He can verify." "It'll be too late by then," Silas cut in. "Martha's asking for her daughter. Would you deny a dying woman her last wish?" Faith looked between the two men, one who had shown her nothing but cruelty, the other who had offered safety and respect. The choice should have been simple, yet the thought of her mother dying alone kept her rooted in indecision. "I'll come with you to see her," she finally said to Silas. "But I'll return here afterward, regardless of what you say." Zachary moved to her side. "Then I'm coming with you." "The hell you are," Silas snarled. "It wasn't a request," Zachary replied, his voice deceptively mild. "Faith doesn't leave my property without my protection. Those are my terms." For a moment, Faith thought Silas would refuse. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Fine. But just you. Your men stay here." An hour later, Faith found herself riding beside Zachary toward the small cabin she had fled months earlier. Silas rode ahead with his companions, occasionally casting suspicious glances back at them. "This feels wrong," Zachary murmured when they had fallen far enough behind for privacy. "I don't trust him." "Neither do I," Faith admitted. "But if my mother really is ill, we'll see her and bring her back to the ranch if necessary," Zachary promised. "You don't have to face this alone, Faith." The simple reassurance nearly undid her. For so long, she had carried her burdens in solitude, convinced that independence was her only protection. Zachary's steady presence beside her challenged that belief in ways both comforting and terrifying. As they approached the cabin, Faith noticed several horses tied outside that she didn't recognize. Apprehension curled through her stomach. "Something's not right," she whispered to Zachary as they dismounted. "Silas doesn't have this many friends." Zachary's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. Stay close to me. The cabin's interior was dim after the bright winter sunlight, and it took Faith's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, her blood ran cold. 6 men occupied the small main room, Silas and his 2 companions, plus 3 rough-looking strangers. Her mother was nowhere in sight. Where is she? Faith demanded, stepping forward despite Zachary's restraining hand. Where's my mother? Silas's smile was ugly with triumph. Visiting her sister in Helena. Been gone a month. The trap sprung shut as the men moved to surround them. Zachary drew his pistol, but one of the strangers already had his weapon trained on Faith. I wouldn't, the man drawled. Hate to spoil such a pretty face. What is this, Silas? Zachary asked, his voice deadly calm despite the danger. Silas spat on the floor. This is business, Irvington. You've got something we want. The Rockingham, Faith realized aloud. This is about the ranch. Smart girl, one of the strangers commented. Waste of a woman, having brains like that. Zachary's expression revealed nothing, but Faith could feel the tension radiating from him. I assume you have terms, he said to Silas. Simple enough. Sign the deed over to my associate here. Silas nodded toward the oldest of the strangers, a hard-faced man with cold eyes. He's got papers drawn up. Sign them, and you both walk away. Refuse, and the girl pays first. Faith met Zachary's gaze, silently pleading with him not to sacrifice everything he'd built for her sake. The ranch was his dream, his future. If I sign, Zachary said carefully, what guarantee do I have that you'll honor your word? The hard-faced man stepped forward. Jenkins Cattle Company has a reputation to uphold, Mr. Irvington. We may cut corners acquiring property, but we keep our bargains. Faith had heard of Jenkins Cattle. They were buying up ranches across the territory, using methods that ranged from economic pressure to outright intimidation. Smaller ranchers had been disappearing for months, either bought out or driven off by mysterious accidents and cattle losses. So Silas is working for you now, Zachary observed. How much did it take to buy him? Enough, Silas smirked. More than this ungrateful bitch is worth, that's certain. Something dangerous flickered in Zachary's eyes at the insult, but his voice remained steady. I'll need to review the papers. The man from Jenkins nodded to one of his companions, who produced a folded document from inside his coat. As he moved to hand it to Zachary, Faith saw her chance. She stumbled forward as if losing her balance, colliding with the man holding the papers. In the same motion, she grabbed the oil lamp from the table and hurled it against the far wall, where dry kindling was stacked for the stove. The lamp shattered, oil splashing across the wood and igniting instantly. Chaos erupted as flames leaped up the wall and thick smoke filled the cabin. Zachary seized the moment of confusion to strike the nearest gunman, while Faith ducked beneath another's grasping hands. Gunshots rang out, but in the smoke and panic, aim was impossible. Faith! Zachary's voice cut through the commotion. He had reached the door and was holding it open against the press of men trying to escape the rapidly spreading fire. She fought her way toward him, gasping as someone's elbow connected with her still tender ribs. Then Zachary's hand closed around her wrist, pulling her through the doorway and into the clean winter air. They didn't stop to look back, racing for their horses as shouts and curses erupted behind them. Zachary boosted Faith into her saddle before swinging up onto his own mount, and then they were galloping away from the burning cabin, snow flying beneath their horses' hooves. Faith didn't know how long they rode, only that they kept to the trees and avoided the main trails. Eventually, Zachary led them to a small hunting cabin she hadn't known existed, well hidden in a stand of pines on what she presumed was Rockingham land. We should be safe here temporarily, he said as they dismounted. My men will have seen the smoke and raised the alarm by now. The cabin was simple but sound. One room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. Zachary quickly got a fire going while Faith stood shivering, the aftermath of danger leaving her cold despite her heavy coat. Are you hurt? He asked, turning to her once the stove was lit. Faith shook her head, then reconsidered. My ribs. Someone hit them during the escape. But it's not serious. Zachary crossed to her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. You saved us back there. That was quick thinking with the lamp. I nearly got us burned alive, Faith said, the enormity of what she'd done hitting her all at once. I didn't think. You created a diversion we desperately needed, Zachary interrupted. Without it, we'd be at their mercy right now. His thumbs brushed her cheeks, and Faith realized she was crying. I was so afraid, she whispered. Not for myself, but for you. The thought of them hurting you. Something shifted in Zachary's gaze, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire now heating the small space. Faith, he said softly, I need to tell you something. What I started to say that night in the stable. She knew she should step away, protect herself from the vulnerability of caring too deeply. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. I've been fighting this since the day I found you on that street in Elkhorn, Zachary continued. Telling myself it was inappropriate given your circumstances, that you needed safety more than complications. But today, when I thought I might lose you, he drew a shaky breath. I love you, Faith Prescott, not as a friend or an employee or someone under my protection. I love you as a man loves a woman he wants to build a life with. The words fell into the space between them like pebbles into still water, ripples of meaning expanding outward. Faith had believed for so long that love was a luxury the frontier didn't permit, that independence was her only shield against pain. Yet here stood a man who had shown her, through actions more than words, that strength could be found in connection rather than isolation. That love could be a shelter rather than a trap. I've been so afraid of needing anyone, she confessed. After my father died, after what Silas did, I convinced myself that depending on others was weakness. And now, Zachary asked, hope and uncertainty mingled in his voice. Faith placed her hands over his where they still cradled her face. Now I think perhaps I was wrong. That there's a kind of strength in choosing to trust, despite knowing the risks. She met his gaze directly. I love you too, Zachary. It terrifies me, but it's true. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Faith answered by rising onto her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, Zachary deepened the kiss, drawing her against him with careful attention to her injured ribs. They broke apart at the sound of horses approaching, both reaching instinctively for weapons. But the familiar call of the Rockingham foreman reassured them before the riders came into view. Mr. Irvington, Miss Prescott. The next hours were a blur of explanations and plans. The foreman had indeed seen the smoke and gathered men, arriving at Silas's cabin in time to capture two of the would-be land thieves who had been overcome by smoke. The others, including Silas, had escaped, but the territorial marshal was already in pursuit with a posse. Jenkins Cattle Company would face serious charges, attempted murder, extortion, and a host of lesser crimes. Their operation was likely to collapse under the scrutiny that would follow. As for Faith and Zachary, they returned to the Rockingham under heavy guard. Their relationship fundamentally altered by the dangers they had faced together and the truths they had finally spoken aloud. Spring came early to Montana that year, the harsh winter surrendering to an explosion of wildflowers across the rolling plains. On the broad porch of the Rockingham ranch house, Faith stood in a simple gown of cream-colored silk, wildflowers woven into her golden hair. Beside her, Zachary couldn't take his eyes off her as the traveling minister pronounced them husband and wife before an assembly of ranch hands, neighboring settlers, and one special guest. Faith's mother, Martha Prescott, recovered from a mild illness and freed from Silas's tyranny after his capture and imprisonment for his role in the Jenkins conspiracy. Mrs. Irvington, Zachary murmured as they turned to face their guests. How does it sound? Faith smiled up at him. The last of her protective walls finally dissolved in the certainty of his love. Like home, she replied. Later, as the celebration continued around them, they slipped away to the paddock where Esperanza grazed with her new foal, a spirited colt that seemed to have inherited both his mother's beauty and her initial wariness. He'll learn to trust, Faith said, watching the colt skitter away from their approach before curiosity drew him back. Just as she did. Just as I did. Zachary's arm encircled her waist, drawing her against his side. We have a lifetime for that lesson, he promised. A lifetime to build something lasting here, together. Faith leaned into his embrace, marveling at how far she had come from that terrified girl fleeing down Elkhorn's dusty street. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving in many ways, but she had discovered a truth she once thought impossible, that in the vastness of the Montana Territory, in the heart of a man who saw her strength and her scars with equal clarity, She had found not just safety, but belonging. And that, she now understood, was the greatest wealth the West could offer.